Hi, and welcome back to episode 2 of the Beginner Backpacking series. And in this episode, we are going to cover the big 3. So what are the big 3? Well, in sequential order, that's very simple. It is your shelter, your sleep system, and your backpack. So basically your 3 most crucial pieces of gear. And we're going to go through those in the order that they go and in the order that they affect each other. And we'll talk about the options you have in each one of those categories that you can make decisions on based on what kind of backpacking you are going to do, the climates you're going to be in, and where you want to go. All right, number 1 out of those 3, shelters. Now, there are multiple different kinds of shelters for you to pick from based on what type of backpacking you're going to be doing, the climate you're going to be in, the area you're going to be in. And those 3 break down like this. So we have freestanding tents, non-freestanding tents, and hammocks. That's basically, without getting into the weeds on that, that's the main 3 you have. And we'll start with freestanding tents. All right, freestanding tents. So in my hand right here, I have a Mountain Hardwear Strato 2-person tent. Now, this is a freestanding tent because it comes with poles. So it needs nothing else to support itself. Now, this would also be considered kind of a semi-freestanding tent too, because to get the full volume out of this tent, you are going to have to stake it out at certain points and kind of pull that fabric tight. But for purposes of this conversation, this is a freestanding tent. So tent, it has its own poles. Generally, these tents are also double layer, 2-layer tents. So there's an inner bug screen, which I know you guys have probably seen before. There's a bug screen that's usually connected to a bathtub floor on the tent. And then you're gonna have your poles, and then over the top of that is gonna go the rain fly. So you have 2 layers of tent, the poles that hold it up, and you have some stake points. That's a freestanding tent. Now, they're probably the most useful piece of gear in everything that we're talking about because they're relatively easy to set up. Most of them are going to come with an instruction manual, or you're going to be able to find some type of a video or instructions to support setting a tent like this up. And after you do it a couple of times, it's pretty self-explanatory. Now, what if you don't have a freestanding tent? That leads us to number 2. All right, number 2 in shelters. So I have in my hands the Lunar Solo by 6 Moons Design. This is a non-freestanding tent, or as a lot of people are going to call it, a trekking pole tent. Why is it called that? Well, let me grab a trekking pole here and I'll show you. It's going to use this, which most people are using to walk all day, as the tent pole. And it has a space for this to fit into to prop this tent up, and then the rest of the tent body is going to be staked out taut away from this tent pole, and it creates a shelter. Now, most of these are going to be single layer shelters. Now, why is it a single layer shelter? Well, because this body of this tent, the rain fly, the floor, everything is all one piece. Now, there's going to be most of them are going to have a vestibule, a door opening of some kind, and there's going to be a mesh or a bug mesh behind that. But other than that, it does not have a full separate body and then a rain fly to go over it. So it is a single layer, non-freestanding tent. Now, the advantages to this are very simple. As you can see, it's very small and it weighs very little. All it takes is the tent body and the stakes that it comes with. And all you're going to need to add to that equation is a trekking pole, or if you don't have one, a stick or anything can be used in place of where that tent pole would be. So these are a great option if you're trying to stay lightweight, and they're going to be more of an option for people that are going to go on longer trips that are trying to reduce their overall pack weight. The downsides of most of these tents that I have found is that to people who are not familiar with putting up tents, this is going to be quite a bit more difficult to put up than a freestanding tent because it requires a certain method to get it taut and to get it stretched out and to get it to where it needs to be. And a lot of people think that, or have a misconception that these tents don't perform as well in wind and weather and those sort of things, and that's just simply not true. They do perform just as well as a freestanding tent. They're just going to be more challenging to set up, and they're going to have some challenges as far as the interior of the tent body, being that it is a single layer tent, is going to pick up lots of condensation. So as you sleep through the night and you're breathing out, you're going to create a moisture layer on the inside wall of this tent that you should probably be prepared to clean up the next morning, especially this tent I've spent a few nights in, and it does get pretty moist on the inside, and it can even drip down onto your sleeping bag. But it's a give and take situation, because like I said, these are preferred for more long distance hikers and even through hikers, because they're simple, they're very lightweight, and once you get used to putting one up and down, it's no different than a freestanding tent. And then there's option 3, which is the option I choose most of the time. This is a hammock gear hammock. It's a backpacking hammock. And the way this is designed is it's like any bunched in hammock that you've ever seen. It's got a body under it that you lay in or sit in, and then it has a bug net that encompasses that body 360 degrees, and it fits in this nice little package here with the carabiners, ready to go. And this kit also has a rain fly that goes over the top of it. So again, kind of like the first tent we talked about, this is a 2-piece system. So I have the body, bug net, and then there's a rain fly that goes over the top of it. Again, this is incredibly lightweight. Some people don't like this option because you're not really enclosed completely like you would be in a tent. You have a tarp over the top of you and you are hanging underneath that tarp. But for me, the reason this makes so much sense is because most of the places that I hike, there is an abundance of trees and places to set this up. I'm really fast at taking this up and down, which really eliminates a lot of setup and tear down time when I'm section hiking the AT or something like that. And I don't want to linger around. When I get up in the morning, I'm ready to go. And I can have this thing put up and in my bag in just under a few minutes. So that's my favorite thing about it. And the third thing, I think, is there's a learning curve to sleeping in a hammock backpacking. However, I sleep better now in a hammock than I do on the ground. So that's how I came to this. I actually switched over to a hammock several years ago when I started section hiking more. And so, like I said, this one's from Hammock Gear. There's tons of different hammock manufacturers available now. This is what I went with. I'm sure that eventually I will try something else just to see what else is out there. But the downsides to this, I will tell you, is there is a little bit of a learning curve on setting this up. It's not too bad. I think it is easier than setting up a trekking pole tent or a non-freestanding tent. This is pretty much a one and done. You'll figure it out the first time you do it, and then you'll be able to replicate that multiple times. The other downside to it is there is a lot of options when it comes to the hardware and the suspension and everything that goes along with a hammock. And it is hard to tell what is really going to be the right setup for you, right out of the gate. So it does take some trial and error. I recommend starting out with something even from Amazon that's cheaper, just to go out and get some practice, figuring out where it's gonna work, where it's not gonna work, because it is a little different than a tent. When you're setting up a tent, you're looking for a space on the ground, large enough to put up your tent that's fairly level, free of debris. With this, your options get a lot bigger in a wooded area, because really you just need 2 trees that are 11 to 12 foot apart, and that's it. Doesn't matter what's on the ground because you're not sleeping on it. All right, on to number 2 of our big 3, sleep systems. Now, we already went through what kind of shelter are we looking for, what's gonna work for us. Now you can understand that your sleep system is next in line, because if you decided, well, I think I'm gonna try a hammock, well then a sleeping pad is not gonna do you any good in a hammock. Most people are not gonna use a sleeping pad in a hammock. You can, I think most people are not gonna do that. But if you have chose a tent for your shelter, then we're gonna have to talk about a sleeping pad. And I've just grabbed this old phone one I have here to show you guys, this is a Thermarest Z-Rest. It's probably one of the most common ones that you see out of any foam. If you did choose a tent, and now you have to get a sleep system that fits in that tent, okay, so what are we talking about? Well, that's simple. You have your options of inflatable sleeping pads or foam ones like I was just holding in my hand, or self-inflating sleeping pads. Now, you need to pay particular attention based on where you plan to be backpacking and what time of year you're going to be backpacking, because all of these sleeping pads, okay, are rated on an R value system. For example, one might be an R2.5, one might be an R.5, or an R5, not 0.5. And that's going to tell you what its insulation value is. Obviously 5 being the higher one, that's a winter pad. A 2.5 would be a summer pad because it doesn't have very much insulation in it. I think between a 3.5 and a 4 is pretty much ideal, even into the shoulder seasons. So pretty much everything that you want to do unless you're backpacking in the dead of winter. And when you're looking at all the variables that go along with that, most people are going to pick an inflatable pad. It's smaller, it's lighter, and it's going to provide way more cushion because it's just the same thing as basically an air mattress that you might have in your house. It's just a more condensed down version for backpacking. There are people, like I said, I had this in my hand a minute ago, that are going to go with something like the Z-Rest or the Nemo foam pad or something. They just are not going to provide a lot of R value, and they're not going to provide a lot of comfort. So basically, to surmise that, there is inflatable pads, self-inflating pads, and there are foam mats. Out of the three of those, you should be concentrating more on the inflatable pads, and you should be looking for R values on those pads. You should be looking for thickness and width that matches your body, so you don't want to buy a 5 foot long pad if you're 6 foot tall, because that's not going to work out for you. The sleeping pads I do own for when I do tent backpack are generally 3.5 inches at minimum thick, 6 foot long. The reason the thickness is 3.5 inches is because I side sleep, and anything below a 3, generally I sink through and touch the ground. So that's something to think about. And that's all stuff we'll dive into in a later video. Now, once you have selected a sleeping pad that you feel like fits your needs, then you're going to move on to a sleeping bag or a backpacking quilt. The reason I bring those two up is that's going to be the two most common things. Now, a sleeping bag, everybody knows what a sleeping bag is. And you're looking for something that is temperature rated, again, to the environment and the places that you're going to go. So if you think it's going to get down at 30 degrees at night, you should probably be shooting for a 30-degree comfort rated bag. Now, there's going to be comfort ratings, survival ratings. Comfort means, well, I'm going to be sleeping pretty good, even all the way down to the comfort rating, hence called comfort. The other one, survival rating, is going to be like, well, you're probably still going to be cold, but you'll survive. That's something to really pay attention to because it is important. Now you're saying, what's a backpacking quilt? Maybe you've never heard of that. A backpacking quilt, you remember we talked about R value in the sleeping pad. A backpacking quilt is exactly what it sounds like. It is a sleeping bag with no back, no zippers or anything like that, where you will put your feet into a foot box, but then the blanket will wrap around you. The reason there's no back, it reduces weight, and typically that insulation that you're sleeping on and smashing into the sleeping pad is useless anyways, because down that is in the sleeping bag, most lofted insulation needs to be fluffed up in order to insulate. If it is smashed flat, it loses its insulation value. So some time ago, somebody came up with the backpacking quilt, and it's become wildly popular. I actually use backpacking quilts in my hammock, which I'm not sure or not may be where quilts started, because in a hammock, you don't need the bottom. Now, in a hammock, now that we're there, I have 2 quilts. That's how I stay warm. So I have an under quilt, which hangs physically under the body of the outside of the hammock. And then I have my backpacking quilt, which is in the hammock with me. So I am basically wrapped 360 degrees in insulation that is rated for the temperatures that I need. So in a hammock, you don't have a sleeping pad per se. There are some people that do use a sleeping pad inside of a hammock, and there are some hammocks that are designed to have a sleeping pad inside them. The system that I use, however, does not. And finally, number 3 of the big 3, your pack. And you see I got some packs hanging on the wall behind me. The reason that you're going to pick this very last is very simple. Now that you have selected your tent, I'm assuming there, you see I already did that. Now that you've selected your shelter and your sleep system, you know about how bulky those items are going to be. Therefore, you can select the backpack that works to carry them, plus the rest of the other things that you need to take, which is why we always choose the backpack last. So out of the backpacks that you can choose, you're going to find that there's going to be a multitude of sizes, both physical sizing for the person wearing the bag and capacity sizes. For example, I've got my G420 here, which is from Gossamer Gear. Now this is a 42-liter bag. Right next to it, however, though, is a Mountain Smith 55-liter bag. Then I have my son's Osprey 50-liter bag. All of these bags have different carrying capacities and work in different ways. So the backpack sometimes can be one of the most complicated purchases because there is an enormous variety of them available. And there's an enormous amount of materials that they are made out of. But we will dive into that in another video. For now, I would tell you that most of the time, depending on the shelter that you select and the sleep system that you select, I like to tell people to start shopping around 50 to 55 liters. That's usually enough to pretty much take everything you're going to need. Now, the other important thing to note about backpacks that we're going to have to get into when we do a more in-depth video on those is sizing. Most of these backpacks have sizing to them, meaning that they come in small, medium, or large, and that's going to relate to the backpack's torso size as well as the circumference of the wearer's waist. And we will talk later on in a video on how you can figure out what size backpack you're going to need. Well, that's your big three explained, and until the next episode, thanks guys, and if you want to keep following along, remember to like and subscribe to the channel, because I'm going to be doing a whole lot of these, and we're going to get way down in the weeds on how to find some of this gear and how to find gear that works for you.